The night was suffocating in its silence, broken only by the hum of distant traffic and the flickering neon lights of the gas station. Emily stood alone by the pump, her eyes flickering between the empty road and the rumbling car that had just driven away. Her parents had been in the car. They were supposed to be taking her home, but somewhere, between the hurry and the anger, they had left her behind. Her chest tightened with disbelief, her breath shallow, as she watched the fading tail lights of their car vanish into the dark horizon. How had it come to this? Had she said something wrong? Had she been too much? The weight of her parents' absence felt like a cruel joke, twisting her insides with shame and fear. She reached for her phone, but the screen was cracked, the battery nearly dead. No one else in the world mattered at this moment, just the gaping void of the space where her family had been. She had always felt alone in their presence, but now it was real raw. She was truly alone. Emily stood alone in the glowing light of the gas station, her breath catching in her throat as she watched her family's car fade into the night. The sudden abandonment struck her like a physical blow, her chest tightening, heart pounding in her ears. The heat of the argument still clung to her skin, the bitterness of words spoken and left unspoken thick in the air. She had always been the outsider in her family, the quiet one who shrank in the shadow of their demands. But this felt different. This was real. She fumbled with her phone. The screen cracked, its battery dangerously low. She called her father, but the call went unanswered. Desperation clawed at her throat as she stared at the empty road. How could they just leave her here? She was still their daughter, wasn't she? With no other choice, she began to walk, the night air cool against her skin, the pavement hard beneath her feet. Each step seemed to echo in the silence around her, the hum of the gas station growing more distant with every footfall. It felt like she was walking into oblivion, her only companion the echo of her own breath. The city around her was silent, its usual noise replaced with the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. As she walked, the weight of the night pressed down on her. She could feel the cold creeping into her bones, the loneliness settling in her chest like a heavy stone. But she pushed on. She had no other choice. She kept walking, past buildings and streets that looked the same, each one more unfamiliar than the last. The city that had once been home now felt like a maze. Where was she going? What was she supposed to do? Hours later, her feet aching and her heart heavier than ever, she found herself back at the gas station. It was the only place that still felt familiar, the only place that had held her family just hours before. She sat in the shadows, her body curled up against the cold, and stared at the empty pumps. She couldn't shake the image of her parents' car, driving away without a second glance. How could they do that to her? The phone buzzed in her hand, the screen flashing with an incoming call. Her father's name appeared. Her heart skipped. She hesitated, but something inside her broke. She answered the call. "Emily, where are you?" His voice was shaky, uncertain. The pain in her chest twisted. "You left me. You just left me at the gas station." The words felt like they were being pulled from somewhere deep within her, a truth she had buried in the pit of her stomach. He sighed, the sound of regret thick in the air. "I'm so sorry, Em. Please come back. We'll come get you." And just like that, the weight lifted. It wasn't forgiveness. No. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name. But she wasn't invisible, not anymore. She was seen. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. As the car pulled up to the gas station, Emily climbed in, her father's hands gripping the wheel tightly, his eyes darting to her, unsure of what to say next. Her mother sat quietly beside him, her gaze downcast, her lips tight. Emily said nothing as they drove through the night, the city lights fading behind them. But in that moment, she realized she wasn't lost. Not anymore. The drive back home felt like a blur, the familiar streets flashing past her like images in a dream. Emily sat in the back seat, her gaze focused out the window, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The silence in the car was thick, heavier than the uncomfortable arguments they used to have. Her parents, once so familiar, now felt like strangers. Her father's grip on the steering wheel tightened with every passing second, his knuckles white. Her mother kept her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. The hum of the tires against the pavement was the only sound between them, the rhythmic pulse of the night. Emily didn't know what to say, didn't know how to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Words felt too heavy, too complicated. What could she say to make this right? to make them see her the way she had always wanted to be seen. She glanced at her parents, both of them looking straight ahead, each lost in their own thoughts. They were all trapped in this unspoken space, stuck in the same cycle of hurt and misunderstanding. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them how much it hurt, how deeply the sting of abandonment had cut. But the words stayed lodged in her throat, tangled with confusion and fear. As the car neared the house, a strange calm settled over Emily. The city lights had faded behind them, the houses becoming more familiar, their shapes solid in the darkness. She couldn't pinpoint the moment when the pain began to soften, but it did. Perhaps it was the comfort of being back in a place she knew, or maybe it was the simple fact that they had come back for her, despite everything. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something that could heal the cracks that had formed in their family. They pulled into the driveway, and the engine rumbled to a stop. The silence lingered, hanging in the air like an unspoken question. Emily sat still, her fingers tracing the edge of her seat, her eyes fixed on the house in front of her. This place, once a symbol of safety, of home, felt different now. It felt colder, more distant. She didn't know if things would ever go back to how they used to be, but one thing was clear: she had changed. She wasn't the same girl who had sat alone at that gas station, feeling invisible and forgotten. No, she had survived that moment, and with it, she had found something within herself, something stronger than she ever thought possible. Her father shifted in his seat, his voice breaking the silence. We've messed up. We know that. We're sorry." His words, simple and raw, hung in the air like a fragile thread, connecting them in a way nothing else had. Emily's heart tightened at the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was a start. And sometimes a start was all they needed. Her mother, who had been silent for most of the ride, finally spoke, her voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. "I'm sorry too. We shouldn't have left you." The weight of her mother's apology hit Emily in a way she hadn't expected. It was more than just words. It was a recognition of the pain she had carried, a validation of her hurt. In that moment, Emily felt a small flicker of hope. She took a deep breath, the air in the car heavy with emotion. "It's not just about the gas station," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "It's about everything. The silence, the distance, the way we've all been living in our own worlds, never really seeing each other." The words felt foreign on her tongue, but they were true. For so long, she had bottled up her pain, keeping it locked away, too afraid to confront it. But now she was speaking it. She was letting it out, even if just a little. Her father nodded, his eyes softening as he glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "We've been blind, Em. We're so sorry for that." The remorse in his voice was palpable, a reflection of the regret that had built up inside him. He reached over and placed his hand on her mother's, a silent gesture of solidarity. Emily watched them, the two people who had once seemed so distant, now seemingly connected in a way they hadn't been in years. It was awkward, but it was real. As they sat there, the night still pressing in on them, Emily realized something. This moment wasn't the end. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step toward healing. Maybe there would be more arguments, more silence. But there would also be moments like this, small, raw, honest moments where they tried, however imperfectly, to reconnect. And that, she thought, was enough for now. The door creaked open, and the cold air rushed in, wrapping around her like a blanket. Emily stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady from the long walk and the emotional weight of the evening. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if things would ever be the same. But as she walked toward the front door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, she was heard, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, and the warmth of the house embraced her. As she stood there in the quiet of the hallway, Emily took a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next, she would be ready. The house felt strangely comforting, yet still foreign in its familiarity. Emily stood in the hallway, the scent of her mother's lavender, scented candles lingering in the air, the faint hum of the refrigerator echoing in the background. Her feet, sore and cold from the walk, felt rooted to the hardwood floor, as if her body was reluctant to move further into the space that had once been home. She glanced around, the walls lined with family pictures, each frame telling a different story, a different version of their lives, frozen in time. The faces of her parents smiled back at her from every corner, but those smiles no longer felt like reassurance. They felt like a reminder of how far they had drifted. Her mother stood near the kitchen, her back to Emily as she busied herself with an almost mechanical precision, stacking dishes that didn't need stacking. The tension between them hung thick in the air. Her father, meanwhile, lingered in the living room, his eyes fixed on the ground, clearly unsure of what to say next. The house felt quiet, almost too quiet, as if the noise of the world had been muffled, leaving them all to contend with the weight of unspoken words. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where to start. The conversations they'd had over the years had always felt like fragments, bits of pieces that never quite fit together. Tonight had been no different. Her parents were sorry. She knew that. But sorry wasn't enough. Not this time. Her mother finally turned, catching Emily's gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them seemed vast, and yet it was so small, just a few steps away, but miles of unspoken hurt and frustration kept them apart. Emily could see the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, the weight of 1,000 untold stories in the lines of her face. She had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, even when it was falling apart. But tonight, Emily could see the cracks. Her mother wasn't perfect, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to acknowledge it. "Mom." Emily's voice was soft, barely a whisper in the quiet room, but it was enough to break the stillness. "I need you to understand. It's not just the gas station. It's everything. The way we've been drifting. The way we've been so busy fighting with each other that we've forgotten how to be a family." Her words hung in the air, fragile and raw. For a moment, she wondered if she had said too much, but the fear quickly faded. She had to say it. She had to let it out. Her mother blinked, her lips trembling, and for the first time that night, a tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Em," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of the apology. "I've been so caught up in my own pain that I didn't see how much I was hurting you." The rawness of her mother's words hit Emily like a wave. She had never seen her mother so vulnerable, so open. It was a side of her she had never expected to see, and yet it was exactly what Emily needed. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the suffocating quiet of avoidance, it was the kind of silence that preceded something profound. Something had shifted. Emily could feel it in the air, in the way her mother was looking at her now, not with judgment or distance, but with a soft, almost apologetic gaze. Her father, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward, his hands still trembling from the tension that had built throughout the evening. "I didn't know how much we'd hurt you," he said quietly, his voice full of remorse. "I've been so focused on everything else, I didn't realize how much we've been pulling away from you." Emily met her father's gaze, searching his eyes for the sincerity she needed to see, and she found it. He was truly sorry, and for the first time, she believed him. It wasn't going to be easy. Healing wasn't something that could be fixed with a single conversation, a single apology. There would be more difficult moments ahead, more arguments, more silent dinners, more misunderstandings. But right now, in this moment, Emily realized that she was no longer alone in this. They had all been hurting in their own ways, and perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new. Something that could mend the cracks that had formed in their family over the years. As Emily sat down on the couch, her parents following suit, the weight of the night seemed to lift, if only slightly. Her father reached over and placed his hand on her shoulder, a tentative gesture that spoke volumes. Her mother, still sniffling, wiped away her tears and gave Emily a small, hesitant smile. It wasn't the big, warm smile that used to light up the room, but it was something. It was a start. "I don't know what the future holds," Emily said softly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "But I want to try. I want us to try." Her mother nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "We will. We'll try. We'll do better." Emily felt the tears come then, not from the pain, but from the quiet relief that flooded her chest. They were going to try. And that was enough for now. She wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for effort. For the willingness to fight through the darkness and find each other again. The night stretched on, the silence no longer uncomfortable, but filled with the possibility of something new. Emily didn't know what tomorrow would bring, But as she sat between her parents, their awkward but genuine presence beside her, she knew one thing: they were going to be okay. They would find their way back, piece by piece. And maybe, just maybe, this family could learn to be whole again. The house, which had once felt cold and distant, now felt like a place where healing could begin. The warmth of the living room wrapped around them like a blanket, offering comfort in its quiet embrace. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Emily allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that everything would be all right. The next morning arrived quietly, with the soft whisper of dawn filtering through the blinds. The house, still wrapped in the cool hush of the early hours, felt different now. It wasn't just the absence of the usual tension. It wasn't just the stillness of a family trying to find its way back to each other. It was something more. A subtle shift in the air, a sense that things were finally beginning to heal. Emily lay in her bed for a moment, letting the light inch across her room, her thoughts moving slowly like the dust motes dancing in the sun. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to wake up feeling okay. She pushed herself up from the bed, stretching with a long, deep breath. Her body was sore from the night before, but there was a strange energy running through her, like a current, pulling her forward. She could still feel the warmth of her mother's touch on her arm, her father's quiet promise to do better. It wasn't the end of their problems, not by a long shot, but it was something real. Downstairs, the smell of coffee filled the house, a familiar comfort she hadn't noticed in months. Her mother was already at the kitchen counter, her hands busy with the morning routine, her face calm. Emily hesitated at the doorway, watching her, unsure of how to break the silence. It was strange, but in some ways, it felt like they were both trying to figure out what to say, how to rebuild something that had felt irreparably broken. "Morning?" Emily said softly, stepping into the kitchen. Her mother glanced up, her eyes soft but tired, as if she hadn't slept much. She offered a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes but still held warmth. "Morning, sweetie," she replied, her voice a little strained but kind. "How'd you sleep?" Emily shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Better. It's been a long time since I've felt like I could actually breathe." Her mother nodded, as if she understood exactly what Emily meant. "I get that. I've been holding my breath for a while, too." She paused, turning to face Emily. "We've been living in a fog for so long, haven't we?" Emily didn't know how to answer, so she simply nodded. She didn't know what had happened to their family over the years, what had caused them to drift so far apart. But what mattered now was that they were here, they were in the same room, and that was enough, for now. The sound of her father's footsteps echoed through the hallway, and Emily turned to see him standing at the entrance to the kitchen, his expression tentative, as if he were unsure of his place in the room. He had always been the one who provided, the one who kept everything running smoothly, but lately, it seemed like he had been struggling to keep up with everything else, with his family, with his own emotions. He cleared his throat. "Coffee's ready," he said, his voice low. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence alone was a silent acknowledgement that they were all in this together now. Emily met his eyes, searching for the right words, but nothing came. Instead, she just walked over to him, her hand resting gently on his arm, her touch lingering longer than usual. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice thick with unspoken emotion. Her father exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the past few days had suddenly caught up with him. "I'm glad too. I'm sorry, Em. I'm really sorry for everything." Emily didn't say anything in return. There was nothing left to say. The apology, though long overdue, felt like a thread connecting them in a way words couldn't. Sometimes silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. They stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the kitchen, the world outside still asleep, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a fragile peace settle in her chest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real, and that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur, each one feeling like a small victory. There were awkward silences, of course, moments when they didn't quite know how to fill the space between them. But there were also moments of quiet connection. Shared glances over dinner, a smile from her mother as she caught Emily doing something small like folding a towel or cleaning the dishes. It was a slow, steady rebuilding process, and each small action added to the fragile foundation they were trying to create. One afternoon, her father pulled Emily aside while she was sitting in the living room, reading a book. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over the room, and Emily looked up at him, slightly startled by the seriousness in his expression. He had been quieter than usual lately, and she wondered what was on his mind. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night," he began, his voice slow and thoughtful. "About how we've been living in our own worlds, and I think you're right." He paused, running a hand through his hair as if searching for the right words. "I haven't been present. I've been so focused on work and everything else that I haven't been here. For you. For Mom. I don't want to lose you, Em." His words were simple, but they hit her like a wave. He was trying, in his own way, to break down the walls they had built between them. Emily's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't just about the gas station anymore. It was about something deeper, something that had been missing for too long. She felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but she held them back, not wanting to break the fragile connection they were building. "I know, Dad," she whispered, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I know. I think we can get through this. We just have to keep trying." Her father smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. "We will. I promise." And with that, a part of the weight lifted from Emily's chest. There were no promises of perfection, no guarantees that everything would be easy from here on out. But there was a sense of hope, of possibility. They were learning, slowly, how to be a family again. That evening, they all sat down for dinner together, the table set with simple plates of pasta and salad. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations of change, but the atmosphere was different, lighter, more open. They ate slowly, sharing stories of their day, laughing at small jokes, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she belonged here. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't lost. She was part of something, a small, imperfect family trying to find its way back to each other. As the night drew to a close, Emily found herself smiling softly as she helped her mother clean up the dishes. There was a long road ahead, full of bumps and detours, but for the first time in a long time, she believed that they could make it. Together. And that belief, however fragile, was enough to keep her going. The days that followed felt like a quiet unfolding. Each morning brought with it the promise of something new, a chance to start over, to rebuild what had been broken. Emily felt the weight of it all in her chest, this delicate, imperfect process of healing, but she also felt the warmth that came with it. Her family wasn't fixed, not yet, but they were trying. They were showing up for each other in ways they never had before. And in that effort, Emily found something she had longed for: hope. Her relationship with her parents, though still fragile, had deepened. They had started talking again, not just about the things that hurt, but about the small moments in between. The things that made them laugh, the memories they had forgotten, the simple joy of sitting together in silence without the burden of unspoken words hanging between them. One Sunday afternoon, as autumn began to settle over the city, Emily and her father sat together in the backyard, the air crisp and cool. They were tending to the garden, something her father had always loved to do, but had stopped caring for years ago. Now it was a shared activity, something they did together when the weather was right. Emily carefully pulled weeds from the flower bed, while her father moved slowly beside her, his hands working with a kind of calm precision that spoke volumes about his own journey toward peace. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I always thought we'd get back to this somehow. I just didn't know how." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a soft, hesitant vulnerability that made Emily's heart tighten. She looked up at him, brushing the dirt from her hands, her heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I didn't know if we would," she admitted, her voice soft. "I didn't know if things could ever be normal again." He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the ground before him. "I don't think normal's what we need anymore. Maybe we just need to find something real, something that works for us." Emily felt a quiet sense of relief wash over her. For the first time, her father wasn't asking for perfection. He wasn't pretending that everything could be fixed overnight. He was simply acknowledging that they had come a long way, and that was enough. And in that moment, Emily realized that they didn't need to find their old selves again. They didn't need to recreate the past. What they needed was to build something new, something that worked for them as they were now, flawed, imperfect, but willing to grow. They worked in silence for a few more minutes, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft scrape of tools against soil. When Emily stood up to stretch, she noticed how the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the garden. The colors of the sky, rich oranges and soft pinks, reminded her of the way things had once been, before everything had changed. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the calm beauty of these moments. Her father stood beside her, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, and they both turned to look at the garden they had nurtured together. The flowers, though still small and new, were beginning to bloom, their petals opening to the sunlight. It was slow, but it was progress. "We've come a long way," Emily said quietly, her eyes fixed on the flowers, the metaphor too clear to ignore. "I never thought we'd get here." He smiled at her, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "Neither did I. But I'm glad we did." The quiet comfort of that moment, standing together, side by side watching the world change around them, felt like a promise. It wasn't the end of their struggles. It wasn't a magical fix. But it was something deeper than what they had before. A foundation of trust, of effort, of raw honesty. They were rebuilding, not just the house or the garden, but their relationship with each other, piece by piece. And that felt like enough. Later that evening, after dinner, Emily found herself sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. The sky above was clear and full of light, each star a tiny flicker in the vastness of the universe. The quiet was different now, not the silence of abandonment, but the peace of being understood. Her parents sat beside her, her mother on one side, her father on the other. They were all quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a shared silence. A silence that spoke of everything they had been through and everything they still had ahead of them. "Do you think we'll always be like this?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness. Her mother, who had been lost in her thoughts, turned to her with a gentle smile. "Like what, sweetheart?" "Together," Emily said, her voice small but hopeful. "Do you think we'll always be this? Trying, changing?" Her father leaned back in his chair, looking up at the sky. "I hope so," he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "We may not be perfect, but we're here. We're trying. And that's what matters." Emily looked up at the stars again, feeling something settle inside her. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the mistakes, not of the challenges, not of the past. She knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. As the night stretched on, the stars above them flickered softly in the sky, each one a reminder of the small moments, the quiet victories, that would carry them through the hard days ahead. The journey wasn't over, but they were no longer lost. They were home. As the weeks passed, the weight of the past slowly began to lift. The tension in the house was no longer suffocating. Instead, it had been replaced by something far more fragile but infinitely more hopeful: trust. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of silence, moments of doubt. But each one was a stepping stone, a small crack in the wall that had once kept them apart. They were learning to live with each other's flaws, to embrace the messiness of their family, and in doing so, they were finding strength. One evening, as autumn deepened into winter, Emily stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her parents prepare dinner together. Her father was chopping vegetables, his movements slow but sure, while her mother stirred a pot on the stove. The soft glow of the kitchen lights bathed the room in warmth, and the air was filled with the scent of something savory simmering. It felt like home, real home. Finally. They had come so far, not because they had fixed everything, but because they had made a decision to be there for each other. The healing hadn't happened in grand gestures or life-altering moments. It had happened in the quiet, everyday choices they made to show up for one another. Emily's heart swelled with something she hadn't expected to feel again: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that erased the past or denied the struggles. No, it was the kind of peace that was born out of understanding. Understanding that their family, like any other, wasn't perfect, but that they were worth fighting for, worth forgiving, worth loving. Her mother glanced over at her, noticing the smile tugging at Emily's lips. "What are you smiling about?" she asked, her voice light, teasing. Emily stepped into the room, her hands tucked into the pockets of her sweatshirt. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said softly. "About how much things have changed." Her father, who had been silent for a moment, looked up from his chopping board. "And how much more we still need to change," he added with a small, rueful smile. "But that's okay. We'll keep trying." Emily walked over to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay with us. All of us, just trying." Her mother set the spoon down on the counter and joined Emily at the table, her voice quieter now, more reflective. "We weren't always perfect, Em," she said, her tone carrying the weight of years gone by. "We didn't always get it right, but we're here now. We're present. And that's all we can do," her father added, stepping back from the counter and wiping his hands on a towel. "Just keep showing up for each other." There was a quiet silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that had come to symbolize understanding, a shared acknowledgement of where they had been and where they were headed. Later that evening, as they sat down to eat, the quiet hum of conversation filled the room. They talked about small things, work, school, the weather, but it didn't feel empty. It felt real. It felt like family. It was the kind of conversation that in the past might have been drowned out by the noise of unspoken words or unresolved conflict, but not anymore. They were learning to be present, not just in the good moments but in the quiet ones too. As the night wore on and the table was cleared, Emily found herself lingering in the kitchen, her hands busy with the dishes. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this content. This settled in her own skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was no longer carrying the weight of unspoken grief, unhealed wounds. She was no longer afraid to look her parents in the eye. She wasn't invisible anymore. Her family wasn't perfect. They never would be. But that was okay. They didn't need to be. What they needed was each other. And that, Emily realized, was enough. As she dried the last plate, she looked out the window at the night sky, the stars shining softly above, and felt a sense of quiet hope settle deep within her chest. The road ahead was unknown, but as long as they had each other, they would find their way. And for the first time in a long time, Emily felt ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore. She never would be.